Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
According to the United Nations, 65 million persecuted refugees were forced to flee from their homes, and forced to flee from civil wars, and forced to flee from areas that were afflicted with severe food shortages. For the last 3 years of the late 1960s, I was a refugee in Biafra, a breakaway nation in the southeastern region of Nigeria. In Biafra, we lived in former classrooms that were converted into living rooms. For 3 years, all schools in Biafra were closed and converted into makeshift overcrowded housing and feeding centers for millions upon millions of Biafran refugees. I was a child soldier on the Biafran side of the Nigeria Biafra War, a war that raged during the last 30 months of the 1960s, a war that was described as Africa's bloodiest war, and a war in which 1 in 15 Biafrans died. My journey to my invention was a 20-year-long journey that began at a war front in July 1969 and ended 20 years later at the frontier of knowledge on the 4th of July 1989. The turning point in my journey to the frontier of the most massively parallel supercomputer occurred 20 years before my experimental discovery of the massively parallel supercomputer that in turn occurred on the 4th of July 1989 and occurred in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States. In July 1969, I was conscripted as a 14-year-old soldier and sent to the Oguta War Front, Igbo land, Biafra, West Africa. I was conscripted at gunpoint into a war that was on par with the American Civil War or the Spanish Civil War. I was the youngest soldier at the Oguta War Front, Biafra. That war turned my ancestral hometown of Onitsha, Biafra, into Africa's bloodiest battlefield. I arrived at the Oguta War Front and arrived a few days after 500 Biafran soldiers fell on the ground. 500 soldiers fell as if they were dry leaves. I was conscripted to replace one of the 500 men that died. At the Oguta War Front of Biafra, there were more guns than pens. That 30-month-long war ended on July 15, 1970, and ended with the defeat of Biafra. In mid-1968, my postal address was the refugee camp at St. Joseph's Secondary School, Awka-Etiti, Biafra. My family of 9 lived in a tiny classroom of St. Joseph's Secondary School. In Biafra, West Africa, all schools were closed from June 1967 through early 1970. Schools in Biafra were closed because they were either located at the war front or closed so that refugees like those of us that fled from Asaba and Onitsha could live in its classrooms. In Biafra, all school classrooms were reconfigured as living spaces for refugees and soldiers. The refugees at St. Joseph's had no chairs, no tables, no beds. Refugees slept on a mat that was spread across the concrete floor, and many slept on bare floors. My father, Nnameka James Emeagwali, who was appointed our refugee camp nurse, said that most refugee children, including my youngest brother, had kwashiorkor. Kwashiorkor is a nutritional disorder that is caused by the lack of protein. Kwashiorkor was prevalent in famine-stricken Biafra. At St. Joseph's refugee camp, there were days I only ate palm kernels and fried cassava flakes called gari. By mid-1970, and 6 months after the war has ended, I was still living in refugee quarters along Port Harcourt Road, Fege, Onitsha, East Central State, Nigeria. Each morning, I took an empty bucket to fetch water from the eastern bank of the River Niger. Port Harcourt Road was a short walk from the banks of the River Niger. Fast forward 4 years from that refugee quarters in Fege, Onitsha, I was in Monmouth, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.